Welcome to the county seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. The debate over control of public lands here in the state of Utah has been simmering now for almost 4 decades, since the passage of the Federal Lands Policy Management Act. It used to be only on occasion that the issue would fester up and boil over with a challenge on a road, a national monument designation, issues of wilderness proposals. However, there seems to be a quickening taking place as these kinds of events happen with greater frequency, involve more players, and with greater consequences to all parties. What might have been a competitive big brother, little brother relationship between fed, state, and local has now turned towards a more combative relationship. Just look at the casualties in the last year: the government shutdown and the closure of national parks, an armed standoff in Nevada, and the following challenges by local sheriffs, including resolutions challenging the very authority of federal law within the county. Grazing permittees are asked to reduce their cattle on public lands by some cases up to 50% to facilitate an overpopulation of wild horses. The continuing possibility of another monument designation in Utah, and a defiant act of civil disobedience to protest the closure of Recapture Canyon in San Juan County. These current affairs have reignited this long-standing discussion about where the role of management should lie, with the federal government or with the states. A little over a month ago, the Salt Lake Tribune, KCPW, and the Hinckley Institute of Politics sponsored a debate over the question, who should manage public lands in Utah? We compliment them for their undertaking. Prior to the debate, it was revealed that this issue is not a priority of voters in general, and after having attended the debate, we witnessed a strong divide between both sides that attended. But I would argue that the lack of interest has more to do with simply not knowing that the issue exists. With that being said, we felt it important to bring you and share with you the highlights of this debate. In the interest of time, we have dedicated the entire half hour without commercials. We will not air the opening remarks, and you can find those on our website, thecountyseat.tv. But rather, we're going to jump right into the questions. You may also review the entire debate on our website along with a full transcript.
Now, the time for a couple of questions from the Tribune newsroom. Team A arguing for the motion. I'm actually going to give you 3 questions, and you can choose which to address. Both of you have talked about the Enabling Act, and Representative Ivory, maybe you can tell us exactly where in the Enabling Act you say that the transfer of public land should come about. The second question is the cost for the state of Utah. You brought this up, Becky Lockhart. It costs the state $9 million to reopen 9 national parks during the 16-day federal government shutdown last fall. $9 million for 16 days. If the state takes over public land management, how are you going to pay for it? And the third question is, you've both sort of alluded that the government closer to the people works better, but is there some value in having some distance from local political and economic pressures? And you each can decide how you want to attack this, and you've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Let me read an Enabling Act to you. It says, the people inhabiting the state forever disclaim all right and title to the waste or unappropriated public lands. That's Alabama's Enabling Act. And they have less than 5% federally controlled lands. And it's Louisiana's and Nebraska's and Oklahoma's and North and South Dakota's. And with respect to a policy change, the Supreme Court, which is what opened the door for us, 5 years ago, the United States Supreme Court unanimously held that the consequences of a state's admission are instantaneous, and it ignores the uniquely sovereign character of that event to even suggest that somehow subsequent acts or policies of Congress can diminish what was already bestowed at statehood, particularly where all of a state's public lands are at stake. You see, the Enabling Act is a solemn compact with rights and enforceable obligations on both sides. That's the United States Supreme Court, and that's all that Utah is asking for, that they honor the same statehood compact that they kept with North Dakota. North Dakota that has 20,000 jobs just looking for people. They're putting billions of dollars right into schools and school buildings and roads, and they manage their own land. With respect to your question on do we need some buffer on local control, that would seem to suggest that there's no political dynamic or control in Washington. We have a federal government that's $1.3 trillion indebted to the Chinese. We have a federal government that has 83,000 pages of regulations that are run through. And so to think that this is a situation that would only happen on local control, at the local level, we do this. We get to meet with the people. We get to get out, and you know my phone number. You know where we live. You get to choose your representatives, and 10 or 20 people can change your representative at the local level where you meet directly with them. That doesn't happen at Washington, where you have that responsiveness and responsibility and accountability for the lives and livelihoods on the ground.
The next round of questions were addressed to Team B, who are against the state of Utah taking over management of public lands.
You say there's a distrust of the federal government, and that's understandable. Why do you distrust state government? County officials are frustrated with the gridlock and bureaucracy of the BLM and the Forest Service. Why is managing public land so complicated, and how would you suggest making the process more county-friendly? And my third question is, you say the federal government has the expertise to do this job best, but here living in the state of Utah, there's you, Pat Shea, former BLM director. We have another former BLM director, Kathleen Clark, working for the Herbert administration. There are people living here with expertise on point. What's the difference if the feds manage versus a qualified team of locals at the state level? And your 2 minutes starts now.
I'll answer the first and third, and my professor friend will answer the second one. The answer to the first one is John Swallow, Mark Shurtleff.
Please hold your applause.
The answer to the third one is we don't have the funding. When I was director of BLM, we increased the funding for fires. There had been a policy in Republican and Democratic administrations of putting the fire out as soon as it appeared. Secretary Babbitt and President Clinton developed a policy to begin letting forest fires do what they do well, and that's get rid of these processes that have been overburdened. I don't disagree with Becky, and certainly her father was an expert on that. But again, we need to cooperate, as we have been doing on these fire situations for the last 2 years. Governor Huntsman created an integrated force of county, state, and federal firefighters that have worked well, and they will continue if we don't keep getting into these false debates.
Here's why managing public lands is so difficult. In Utah, in 1950, the population was 688,000. Today, it's over 2.8 million. The U.S. population in 1950 was 157 million. Today, it's 314 million. There are 314 million owners of the public lands. So there's a lot of input, a lot of interest, and balancing those is a very difficult job. I frankly think the BLM has actually done a pretty good job under very, very difficult circumstances. Thanks.
From this point forward in the debate, each team was then given an opportunity to ask the other team a question.
We believe that we've established that the states, not the federal bureaucracies, have history on their side when it comes to who should manage public lands. We've shown that the results of ignoring the very nature of our governing partnership has led to a federal bureaucracy trying to manage those lands that is billions of dollars behind in maintenance, burning down national forests, killing untold numbers of animals, and devastating air quality and watersheds for generations. They're shutting off access all over the West and shutting down our national parks as non-essential. Now, while we understand you might not want to answer this directly, we ask that you would. Do your best to explain why might Utahns be inclined to trust the same federal bureaucracy to properly manage public lands going forward.
Team B, your response, you have 5 minutes.
All right.
Starting
Thank you.
Now.
Interesting question, and I would simply look at what I did when I was director of BLM. We came in after the 1994 election where there was a contract for America, or some people said a contract on America. The BLM had 12,500 employees. When the Clinton-Bush transition happened, we had it down to 9,500. We had reduced the size of the BLM. Last year, or actually, in 1989, when the Obama administration took over, it was back at 11,500. I found in the hallway of the director's office more than half the people there were Republicans who came in as political appointees and then metamorphized into civil servants. So what happens is you were burrowing in as Republicans to take over these different, quote, bureaucracies because they were fairly steady jobs. So I don't think the question of bureaucracy is a problem at the federal level. It exists at all levels of state organizations or federal organizations and any large organization. Try to get a hold of Google, as I did today, and I was on hold for 2 hours because they have this automated system. So I don't think, with all due respect, that bureaucracy is the problem. The problem, quite frankly, on the land management side is the constant cutting of budgets and not funding adequately those people who need to do the job that needs to be done on our forests, on our public lands, and particularly on our waterways. For the last 23 years, we have been going through this delusional process that somehow the very wealthy shouldn't pay their fair share of taxes, and instead we should deprive the public servants from doing their public duty. We've got to change that, or we will continue to have these kind of wildfires that burn out of control. Our waterways will be polluted, and as climate change hits harder and harder, we will not have the resources at a federal level to deal with them. So I think it's time that we come up with some resolutions, some good thinking about what's going on. And instead of getting into these artificial debates of us against them, it's all we. We're the people of the United States. We ought to solve our problems. And I hope that we're able to move ahead on that. And I'll sit down so we get more time to have discussions.
We have a little more time. Okay.
3 minutes.
Part of the reason why public lands today are so difficult to manage is because of short-sighted policies in the past. We made some bad decisions in the past regarding overgrazing and the way we managed timber, and today we are suffering the results of those short-sighted policies. And we are in an adjustment period where we're trying to change that, but it's going to be difficult, and we're going to have some serious problems. Changing those policies and coming up with adaptive, sustainable management plans costs money. And that means we can't underfund initiatives like that and expect them to actually survive. And on the flip side, the other problem we have is we continually subsidize extractive industries and the kinds of things that actually damage the land the most. If you want to pay for those things, you should have to pay for them not in your tax bill, but when you actually buy the product. So if we quit subsidizing the damaging industries and activities, and we start caring for the land in a long-term, sustainable manner, we can solve these problems. And
1 minute.
Let me just reiterate something that Pat said, and I think this is really important. It's not the state of Utah versus the United States government. All of us are citizens of both of those entities. It's the state of Utah working with the United States government. It's all these entities working together collaboratively. That's how we solve problems. When we get together and we think
30 seconds.
And we communicate and we listen, we can actually solve problems. And I think that's the way to go.
Ken, during the Salt Lake Tribune webcast, I asked you, did you support or did you oppose what Cliven Bundy had been doing in southern Nevada? I didn't ever get an answer, and I think the people here tonight and the people listening over KCPW are entitled to an answer to that question. Second question, we, the state of Utah, has spent over $10 million on RS 2477 roads. We have yet to have a single judicial victory on that question. We have wasted the education of 2,000 Utah students by the money we have wasted on figmented judicial decisions.
Ken, everything that I read came directly from the Utah Enabling Act. And what I would like to know is, you remember that movie when they said, "Show me the money"? I want to see the language that actually makes the promise that you keep referring to? Give me a citation. Give me a court case. Give me a law.
Time.
Give me some kind of information on it.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
This is not a
Now.
debate about a rancher in Nevada. This issue is so much bigger than that. That's why legislative leaders from all over.
Please hold your applause. Please hold your applause. Thank you.
People are frustrated all over the West. As we mentioned, Governor Bullock from Montana. Fire is devastating the land and the wildlife, the habitat, the watershed. This is an issue impacting the entire West. That's why legislative leaders all around the West got together to restore balance in our governing system that is clearly out of balance. With respect to the Enabling Act, it says the people inhabiting the lands forever disclaim all right and title until, if you read the rest of the sentence, it says until title thereto shall have been extinguished, and then it also says that 5% of the proceeds of the sale of public lands, which shall be sold, shall be paid to the state to support the common schools. Take the rest of that.
No cat calls, please. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to address one of the things that was brought up, which had to do with the cost to reopen the national parks. And I think it's important that we address one of the myths that is coming from the federal side, and that is that somehow the state of Utah wants to take over the national parks. House Bill 148 made it very, very clear that Utah has no interest in taking back or having transferred to her the national parks. There are 5 national parks, 7 national monuments and historic sites, and 33 congressionally designated wilderness areas. Those are off the table. We're not talking about those. We hope that everyone will stop talking about those areas because we agree with those. Those are congressionally designated national parks, national monuments, and wilderness areas. And we enjoy those as people. We want those to stay managed by the federal government, and rightly so. So let's move away from that. Let's stop talking about that. The reason that we paid $9 million for 16 days to open the national parks is because they were so incredibly critical to the local economies in those areas of the state. We could not survive as a state in those economies without having those parks open. So we did what we need to do as a state, which is to use state tax money to open those parks. And by the way, that money has not been paid back yet. We'll see if it will, but we are more than happy to have had those parks reopened for those 16 days. Ken brings something up very important, and that is this discussion about the Enabling Act. Read the entire Enabling Act. Read all of the language of the Enabling Act until the lands are disposed of, and the proceeds shall be given to the school children of the states. Until and shall are incredibly important words. The promise was kept to the eastern states and the Midwest states. The promise has not been kept. The promise that was made in the contract at statehood with the western states. That's all we're talking about. We're talking about having the federal government live up to the same contractual promise at statehood that was made with the other states.
In fact, there's a law review done by Brigham Young University that came out a month and a half ago that goes into great detail and says that there's a very credible constitutional case to be made on this term of the Enabling Act, that the federal government needs to honor its obligations. With respect to access, I'm glad you brought that up, because in every travel management plan by the BLM and the Forest Service, they're shutting off access all over the West. Thousands of roads all over the West in states all over the West.
Please hold your applause.
And it's the state of Utah that is
minute.
spending millions of dollars to keep that access open for you. With respect to the cost that Pat Shea brought up, Nevada just came out with a report last month that said that managing the BLM lands, Utah, they looked at Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Idaho, managing the similar lands in Utah generates $33 an acre positive net revenue.
30 seconds.
While the BLM loses 91 cents an acre. Yes, indeed, we cannot afford to manage it the way the federal government does, but we can't afford not to do it the way the state does.
The third part of the debate was a chance for each team to give their closing remarks.
The first thing I'd like to point out is if we raise the grazing fees from $1.39 to where the state charges $11 or private land charges $20 an AUM or animal unit measurement or month, then we wouldn't be having this problem, Ken, but I don't think you would like that.
Please, let our debaters debate, please.
Could we continue to have a civil debate here? I hope so. The point that I do want to make is that it's always avoiding the question that needs to be addressed. What happened in Nevada, what happened in San Juan County is inherently dangerous to BLM employees, to federal employees, to state employees. The idea that a 5 or 7-year-old can be riding on the handlebars of an ATV with an automatic weapon held by the driver is absolutely, in anybody's sense, unsafe. If that's the kind of way that we're going to have the states managing public lands, then heaven help us. It's not responsible. It's not something our children or our grandchildren would be proud of. We need to come up with answers that we can solve as a community. It's not a finger-pointing game. It's a game of coming up with solutions. Let's look at the Recreation and Public Trust Act and see ways that we can rationalize the landscape instead of spending all this money on lawyers and litigation.
30 seconds.
I think it's important that when we leave here today, we resolve that we will work as citizens of Utah and citizens of the United States to come up with sustainable solutions into the future. And the idea that we're going to sit around and flip a switch and we're going to be in charge by God is not going to solve the problems that have happened in the last 10 days or 10 weeks.
Thank you. Under Pat Shea's BLM, the federal government locked up 1.8 million acres without talking to a single Utahn. They did it despite the Council for Environmental Quality saying, I'm increasingly of the view that we should just drop these Utah ideas. These lands are not really endangered. And yet they did it without talking to a single Utahn. A week ago, Commissioner Darren Bushman from Paiute County called me and said the Forest Service wanted to do a 40 to 50,000 acre prescribed burn. And they asked them a simple question. Can we go in and take out any usable timber before you burn the forest? They said, no, that'd be a commercial harvest. You'd have to have an environmental impact statement, and there'd be litigation for years. We can't let you take out anything usable. We just have to burn it all up. You know, up in Heber, there's a company that takes standing dead timber they can cull out of the state and local and private forests, and they can build homes that are 75% more energy efficient out of dead standing timber. And they do that without burning the wood up into the environment, without burning the animals and destroying the watershed for generations. With policies like this, these failed policies where you could take, and there's millions of homes in standing dead timber that they simply will not allow for productive activity. With policies like this, rigid and failed policies like this, it makes you wonder, do they really care about the people on the ground and the lives and livelihoods? Or do they just simply want to watch the world burn?
A few years ago, Pat and I were part of a team that traveled to Iron County to try to see if we can't find some resolution to the RS-2477 roads issue there. And we called together as many different stakeholders as we possibly could. There had to be at least 30 or 40 people around the table. And everybody was there. The environmental groups and the ATVers and the ranchers and farmers and local officials and the Bureau of Land Management, everyone was sitting around that table. And as I sat there and I looked around, I thought, you know, there's no bad guys here. What I saw around that table were my fellow Utahns, my fellow Americans, and I realized that if we can just come together and we can actually start talking to one another and listening, not just talking, but also listening, that we can make real progress on these kinds of issues. That if we collaborate and we negotiate and we work out these hard problems together as friends and neighbors, instead of this very high conflict approach that our good friends are advocating, which I think will create problems rather than solve problems. If we can talk together, the Utah contingent and
30 seconds.
The people from the BLM and all those many, many different interest groups, we can actually solve problems. Keep in mind tonight that this is actually a great problem to have. We're here arguing over how we manage an incredibly precious resource that we all love. That's a really
10
good
seconds.
problem to have. Let's work it out.
I've spent most of the past year traveling around the state of Utah, talking to local elected officials and countless members of the public. It's what we do as state officials. I've crossed paths with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Senate president, and dozens of members of the Utah House and Senate doing the same thing. Why do we do it? Because local officials are accountable. We know we are accountable, and let's not fool ourselves. Federal bureaucrats thousands of miles away are accountable to no one. It won't be a Washington bureaucrat who looks in the eyes of the Beaver County commissioners when they express their concerns about feral horses and the damage they have caused to the lands and the economy. I did. It won't be a Washington bureaucrat who looks in the worried eyes of a homeowner in San Pete County, concerned that his life's work will burn to the ground.
1 minute.
Because fences don't know the difference between federal and state lands. Utah's Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox did. It won't be a Washington bureaucrat who looks in the eyes of a hotel owner at the entrance of a national park and promises to reopen the parks. County commissioners and sheriffs did. Who then will best manage public lands in Utah? President Hoover said this in 1929. Our western states have long since passed from their swaddling clothes and are today more competent to manage much of these affairs than is the federal government. We must seek every opportunity to slow the expansion of federal bureaucracy and place our communities in control of their own destinies. Who should manage the public lands in Utah? Utahns.
We would like to thank you for joining us for this debate. We appreciate your audience and tuning in. We would like to thank the Salt Lake Tribune, KCPW, and the Hinckley Institute, along with the participants of this debate, former BLM Director Pat Shea, Professor Daniel McCool, Representative Ken Ivory, and House Speaker Becky Lockhart for bringing to light the important topics. We'd love to hear your comments on this topic. I know it can be very emotional, but please keep your comments civil and constructive. The most important part of all these issues you see in the news regarding public lands is that it's getting people to take notice and talk about it. So please go to our website and it will point you to our social media and YouTube channel. You can share that with your friends. Remember, the local level is where things get done, so get involved in the discussion so that you may be part of the solution. Thank you for joining us on The County Seat. I'm Chad Booth. We'll see you next week. If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4 Utah.